Okay. I don't know if do I have to be able to like share my audio and visual and video to be able to hear you, or at least for you to hear me, like to speak to you, I guess.
Hello? Can you hear
I
me? Hello?
I can hear you now. Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Okay, okay. Okay, it's good. It's working. It's working now.
Perfect. Okay. Do you want me to like be here like with my audio or anything on, or like do you want to be on Discord to like I don't know how you want to set it up.
I'm actually quitting Discord, or at
Okay.
least the notifications.
Okay.
I'm just gonna quit it
Okay.
because they
So
keep on
we
popping
just
up.
perfect. Okay. Yeah. Now I'll be able to. Yeah. If you need any help with anything, I can help answer questions or anything like that.
Is it showing my PowerPoint right now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, because I used a virtual desktop. I can switch
Interesting.
between them.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that works because I haven't tested it yet.
Yeah, it is working.
Behind the scenes. Which committee are you a part of?
I'm actually on the ShellHacks committee, so I'm mainly just been helping out with like the activities.
Have you liked it so far?
No, it's been nice. I'm pretty excited. It seems like everyone's well, at least enjoying it for the most part, and then we definitely have a lot of people participating, so that's always good.
Yeah, I know. I just hope people come to mind. I was just in the intro to Python, and there's 100
Mhm.
people.
Okay, yeah, that's a lot.
I was like, damn. Like even for a workshop that there's other workshops going on and people are doing their projects already.
Hmm.
It's like hundreds a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, it might start letting people in.
Okay, sounds good.
Why does it say 3 out of 9 here? Do you know?
I'm not sure.
Not a big deal.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with Hopin, so
So we already got some people. Let me stop my screen share just for a second.
okay, sounds good.
Do you know any HTML and CSS?
No, I actually do not. I mean, I know some coding languages. I'm a mechanical engineering major. I do know, but I have messed around with. I'm probably most familiar with Python. Um, but then I also like I've messed around with Java and C++. I'm actually learning C++ for a class right now and some other things. But yeah, I actually don't know almost any HTML. I haven't really ever looked into it. So
Okay, that's fine. Dang, Caesar joined for a second and he left. I felt that. I don't know if he left. It's kind of not updating for me, but
um,
okay. Now it shows he's here. Ooh, 11:57.
is there anything in particular like you'd like me to help with or anything like that that I can best do to help just in terms of
If people like ask questions in the chat,
Mhm.
then just like if when I pause, just like ask them. because
Okay.
I'll have like trouble looking at it because to look at it, I only have like my one screen. So to look at it, I have to like switch.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So,
Yeah. I'll do that then. Yeah. Perfect.
look, someone's got a question for you.
Nice. Can they hear all? Can they hear us?
Yeah, they can already hear us. They can already hear us.
Hello.
And if you're asking how my stairs stay up, it's not staying up at all. It's just like the illusion of the headphones, which I could actually. Okay, can you still hear me?
I can. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so it's already like almost 12, but I'm gonna get started at like 12:05. But in the meantime, I was just about to ask you guys have any questions. How can I get a freelance web design gigs here in the US? I'm an international student. So in general, for freelance, you could either get it through like connections or like websites like Fiverr. If you search up Fiverr, you'll find like what it is and whatnot. But for web design and web development in general, I wouldn't recommend going freelance as like it's not something that it's easy to start in terms of like actually being lucrative enough to like live off of. And well, it's like super time consuming. And sometimes with your clients, it's like very vague. And like it's a harder business practice when you're doing freelance web design. That being said, you can still do it and you can try it out. Like everybody's experience is different, but it is definitely is rough to do freelance web design. If you're international, like if I were to say that, you can definitely like search up Fiverr, and I believe they still like you can still be international and use Fiverr and stuff like that. No problem. Look, it's exactly 00. Okay, so are there any other questions like so far? So far, this sounds so weird. I'll get started in 5 minutes for those of you just joining. I want to have some time for everybody to kind of roll in. So I also want to talk about like my main focus for this workshop. I want to focus on like deliverables that you guys can incorporate inside of your hackathon projects, and as well as like go over the basics of web design, well, web development, and like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, stuff like that. And then I want to go over one thing at the end that's kind of like more advanced and out there. That like if you guys are like try to like use it, it's actually a really cool like feature that'll allow like you to take your web design, your like your website to like the next level. That's kind of like my goals for this workshop. Is there anything like that you guys want to get out of this workshop that you like want me to talk about or introduce during the workshop? Like, do you have any like key points that you like? I'm attending this to get this from the workshop. Flexbox and grid knowledge. I didn't plan to go over Flexbox and Grid like specifically, because I want to like incorporate things that like generally you'll get into, not specific to the design, but like the web development process. So kind of like what someone just said. So I can go over like Flexbox and like Grid and like media queries, but that'll be at the end of the workshop, more or less. Okay, I'm just gonna wait 2 more minutes before starting. I'm gonna get water really quick before we start. Stay hydrated, everybody. Yep, exactly. How does React differ from regular HTML, CSS, JavaScript? That's actually one of the key concepts I wanted to go over, different frameworks and like React versus like regular web development. And Kevin, how was your day? My day was tiring. It's already like 12:04. Get to end it at 1 a.m. It's like the best type of day. Although I love teaching, so it's something I'm personally passionate about. Okay, I'll get started, or at least start sharing. Okay. So, welcome, guys. This is the HTML CSS workshop. This got the UPE code branding because I'm the UPE code director. I'm Zachary Santana. I attend FIU. I've done a lot of workshops for UPE code, and I did some workshops for ShellHacks last year as well, so you might remember me. I did mostly JavaScript for last year's. If you're going to do web development, like the bare bones that you need is Visual Studio Code, and we have this listed in the prerequisites, but if you do the other web development workshops, you're also going to need JavaScript, like our JavaScript runtime environment, which we like mostly use Node or almost always use Node. So if you search up Node, you find the download. You can also look at the prereqs in the Hacker's Guide, and it will have Visual Studio Code and Node. So if you guys haven't already, like follow us on social media, join us on Discord, that type of thing. You can also connect with me. I'm like posted at the end. That way we don't have to like stop the flow, but I'll get started in the actual content. So web development is the product of 3 main languages combined to give you some type of web page. Now you can use like add-ons to these, but it all breaks down and boils down to these 3 core languages. You have HTML, which decided to show its white background for some reason. You have CSS and JavaScript. HTML is the actual layout. CSS is the styling. JavaScript is the interactive part. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript. This slide is more so going into that they're separated into files that like are specific to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I'll show some examples later on. But it's possible in like React to combine these, as well as you can actually just do everything in the HTML file. But it's not actually recommended to do that at all, because then your file will be like 3,000 lines long and you won't get anything done. So like I said, HTML is like the boilerplate of the website. So your HTML is actually going to be like your schematics, and then your CSS is going to be like how the chair looks. And then if the chair goes up and down, is going to be your JavaScript. That's kind of how I think of it. So CSS styles. Here's some common CSS terms like selectors, declarations, properties, and values. So CSS works in a way of you have some type of selector and you give it values, which are denoted with keys. So all of the values and keys in CSS, like display, width, height, min width, cursor, stuff like that, all of them have a specific like list of keys they can be, and you assign them the keys so that you know what to actually display, how to style it, or how it should look in the browser. So the first thing, or the first concept you should learn when you're doing web development is DOM, the document object model. So, or document object manipulation. Sometimes websites like vary it up on you. But the DOM is basically the actual like methodology that HTML uses, or web browsers interpret HTML, what they use to use the CSS and use the JavaScript to actually make the website. So it's a little complicated in terms of like the whole upper concept, but once you actually get into the nitty gritty, it gets much less complicated. So HTML boils down into tags or objects. You can kind of see them similar, but they're a little unique in objects because they all nest inside one another. And we'll see that later on. So each and every single website has an HTML tag to start off. You can also have a head tag, which has metadata, which we'll go over metadata in the future. You can also have body, which starts the visual content of the actual page. You can have headers, which is H and then some number, line breaks. You could have a link with an A tag. Here are some others like unordered list, order list, list items, navigation, section, div, span. A lot of these do very similar things like section and div. Most people don't really know the difference. Now, by default, they do something very slightly different, but we choose which one we want for semantic reasons. So if we have like divs everywhere, your code might be really, really not legible. So you might want to like switch it up between divs and spans or divs and sections, or you might actually want to use a navigation instead of a div. So your legibility of your code suffers if you just like use one object type, which you could do something like that in Java where you just use object everywhere, but then you can't really read your code or you can't really use stuff to its full advantage. So I have a link at the end of the presentation, like it says, that has like a whole list of different object types or tags in HTML. You can also just search up like different tags. There's a bunch of them that you can use. There's even stuff for like progress bars and stuff that people like make a whole implementation for, but HTML's already got it. So they could have just used that. So here's a little like sneak peek of the nesting that I said. So every single object or HTML tag just nests inside of another one, with HTML, the HTML tag being the surrounding one that covers everything. So your HTML has the head. Now I said the head had metadata. This is going to be data that is actually not displayed to the user directly. So this could be like the title. It will also have like the description. We can also have imports, which is basically something from another file. We're going to say, okay, this file actually uses it. This web page uses this styling or this JavaScript. And then we actually go to the body, which is what we'll visibly see. So this is an accurate representation of the nesting in HTML, but it's not an accurate representation of what the user sees. So the body right here is actually when the user would start seeing stuff. Okay, so really quick, is there any questions? Can you guys hear me fine? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, it looks good then. All right, do you guys have any questions about what I've gone over? So this is like a quick overview of like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, kind of like the bare bone basics. You guys can use the Q&A tag or the chat tag. I just want to take like a quick. Okay, and then I think I can, continue because it's like this is supposed to be like the introduction. If you don't know anything, this should be like useful. But if you've already done some web development, maybe like there's a couple of stuff that you just didn't know. So here's some like visible examples because I'm a visual learner. So like I said, some heading tags are always followed by a number, and the larger the number gets, the smaller it gets. Here's some unordered lists and ordered lists. So the first one's an unordered list, so they use bullet points. You can customize this actually. And this ordered list uses 1 and 2. I also do a header at the top that displays this. This has some additional styling to it to display the header a little nicer, but I just wanted to accentuate that there's a list item for a unordered list and a list item for an ordered list. Like it looks a little different. Here's how you would do a link. So I just wanted to show the concepts of, there's a couple of these. I just wanted to show the concept of these rather than like a visual representation, because it's going to look really weird just showing Google. But you have the actual website that you want to go to and then the target. So the target means, is it going to open up in this web page or is it going to open up in a new tab? So usually you want your tab to stay, so like they have to be on your website longer rather than like close it out. But maybe like you're going to the same website, then maybe you don't include the targets of link. For images, it's kind of the same thing. You have some source. You don't need a relative path. You could put like a whole website there. But this example uses a relative path. And then you should have some alternate text, which the alternate text is going to be displayed for in case the image can't load, or if they're using some type of like accessibility that, let's say they can't see images, or they have like a Braille reader or something like that, it's going to show this alternate text instead because they just can't see the image. So for tables, which is kind of like grid layout, but not really, here's like an example code, and here's how the table would look. So it structured it down to 3 rows and 3 columns, and it makes them like nice and neat. Here's another table that has some styling to it. So you might see this like on a PDF. So these are like 2 different types of weight. This table also breaks right here. There's like another P tag, but there's like an example of the tables and kind of like the formatting. Tables might be a little confusing with the TRs and THs, and if you don't indent, it can easily mess up. So that's like a quick pointer. Okay, forms are extremely important for like getting to contact someone, or for someone like submitting some application like you guys had to do for ShellHacks. So our form doesn't look exactly like this. It looks a little nicer, but this is like a basic first name, last name with some default values of John and Doe. It's pretty simple. When you use forms, you're going to have a lot of inputs, and the inputs change depending on what type you give it. By default, it's just going to be like a typable input, but you can change it to submit. You can change it to like a radio button or checkbox. I think the Alexa or something started going off. Oh my gosh, that scared me a little bit. But here's a little more styled one that has like a couple, and then it has a draggable text area, which we would use actually a text area instead of an input. So we can also add properties like an ID, name, class, also type that we just saw, and we can also like something like a for. This is like a quick overview of them. The most important one that I think like will you use a lot in your projects is probably class. Class allows you to select it inside of your CSS with like a bunch of things have a class. So you edit all those things how they look. Rather than like something like an ID, which is unique. You're supposed to give one element on your page an ID, but it's going to be useful if you want something to link to a specific element, then you want it to have a specific ID. So this is also like how you create the files. Every HTML file ends with HTML. Every CSS file ends with CSS. Every JavaScript file ends with JS. So this shows the DOM a little more and how to style with CSS. So if we were to display this, I didn't put a sample, but we would see my website in the highest font that's like pre-made for us in H1, and we would see it as a red color. Just like before, like the last slide that we saw with the color red, we have our key or our property, and then we have some value. So we select something, and then we give it a list of keys and values that we want it to adhere by. So if we were to implement this into any like website, every single paragraph tag would have to have a font family of Arial. Now in CSS, you can override stuff just like any other language. So we could put like exclamation important, but that's not a very practical use, and that's actually discouraged in general. You should try to like style your CSS in a different way then.
Someone actually had a question. So Nicholas asked, where does the input data go? This was a couple slides back. And then the Prism bot also asked, where does the data being submitted on the form get saved?
Okay, that's actually a great question. So with forms, what actually happens is when you use a form, you should give it a property, just like we have a property value here. You should give it a property that's called action. And what action does is it should lead to some other file, like a PHP file. There's like a couple different files that you could lead it to. And when you lead it to that file gets the information when they submit the form. So in actual application, how it looks like for the user, they'll see this like in the bottom left. And when they click submit, what the website will do or the browser will do, it'll get whatever action the form does, which you should lead it to another website. And then it'll send them to that other website for a split second. Almost every single like form that you fill out, the website that they go to when it gets submitted, that website just redirects you back to another one, unless it's like broken or something like that. But it always just redirects you back to another website. So you're there for a second, it gets the data, it stores it, it gives them an email, it does whatever functionality, and then it sends them back to another website. In this implementation, the form actually the data doesn't get saved anywhere. If you wanted to save the data, then you would have to make like a server that has a specific website and then send the action to that website. And then you'll get the data from the inputs. Now you have to like label the inputs, and I can actually direct like in the web dev chat in ShellHacks, I can like give some really useful resources and show like an example, but it's just not on the slides. What's the other question? Where does the data submitted? I think that was like kind of like the same question-ish. Someone asked, is Visual Studio Code better than Atom? I just personally like it better than Atom. I think it has more extensions and a more bigger community, but that's personal preference. Okay, here's another example of using the DOM, but this time, instead of manipulating it via the CSS, we are manipulating it via the JavaScript. So this idea is unique. So we're going to grab that unique document element, and then we're going to set the inner HTML to my new high one. So what that means is the inner HTML is everything inside of the H1. So this, all the way until the end right here. So my website, that's all that's in it. If we were to do the body.inner HTML, like we get the body's inner HTML, that would include the H1. So we'd be overriding the H1. But in this case, we're getting the inner HTML of just the H1, which is my website, and then we're setting it equal to my new high one. So if you were to like run this website and it correctly has the JavaScript and the HTML, like you boot it up, then you'll see my new high H1. So this is like the exciting part that I wanted to get into, and then we'll get into the useful examples that you guys should incorporate in your hackathon projects if you have a website. So JavaScript frameworks, it's like all the rage in web development, and for like a very good reason. JavaScript frameworks allow you to do more work with less code, and it allows you to organize your code, especially in a team environment. But even if you're doing a local project just by yourself, it allows you to organize your code and make reusable components rather than like managing everything yourself using JavaScript. It can get very lengthy and very, very, very hard to manage. So every single JavaScript framework, not every single one, but most of the popular ones use a virtual DOM. What that means is you don't actually directly modify the DOM, but you have like a puppeteer above it that's kind of modifying it for you. So you tell it to do something and it'll modify the physical DOM for you. The benefit of this is that we don't couple our code directly to the DOM, and we're only coupling to the virtual DOM. And whatever we're coupling to the virtual DOM, since we're always coupling just to that, like we're not coupling specifically to something else, we don't have to worry about further implications. Now that sounds kind of confusing, but let's say we have like a bunch of nested objects or nested tags in our HTML. It's going to be much easier to edit them if it's a virtual DOM because they're less coupled with each other than if it's a physical DOM where they're going to be, let's say you override something and now all the stuff inside of it's lost. Rather than a virtual DOM, all the stuff inside of it's kind of stored in your virtual DOM. Like you can still use it somewhere else. So here's like the big three frameworks that I'll talk about, and I also talk about a couple others, but these are like the three main ones. So we have React, which is backed by Facebook, made by Facebook, is used in Facebook. We have Vue, which Google uses, they even use it for their like jobs.google platform. It's actually made in Vue. And we have Angular, which companies like PayPal and Netflix use. So let me talk about a little more, because I want to talk about it more before I talk about the other frameworks. But so React is by far the most popular framework, and there's a good reason for it. It's very simple, and it has a large community that keeps on simplifying it while adding more features to it. So recently, not really recently, but they've added like hooks. You can make your own hooks. You can do like higher order components, stuff like that. And the code looks really legible. In contrast to something like Angular, where there's a lot of boilerplate, which is really useful once you get into it, but the learning curve might be really high. So like you'll have like a bunch of files, you won't initially understand why you need to like add components or make all these annotations or make all these functions that like aren't really doing anything. So like the learning curve is pretty high, but once you actually understand it, it becomes really useful. Unlike React, where it kind of just hides everything in the background, and to do anything, you need to explicitly write it. Vue's kind of not like those two. So what Vue does is it kind of combines HTML, CSS, and JavaScript into one file. And inside that one file, it manages, you slightly manage it, but it manages for you the coupling of them. That way you can write components that are kind of like self-succinct. You can do the same thing in React exactly, but it's actually a little more easier in Vue. But the downside is when you use Vue components together, it's not as easy as React. So it's like a trade-off. Each one has a trade-off with the others.
Yeah, I was going to say someone did actually have a question. What exactly is a framework? And then there was also another one.
Okay. So a framework is a kind of like a project that someone made that you use to simplify your life. That's kind of like what you need to know about a framework. If you want like the formal definition, you could like search it up. But every single framework is made by like a group of people, usually open source. Those are the best frameworks. And it's made to simplify your life in a very specific category. So these three frameworks in particular are web development frameworks. So each one tries to help your life in web development when you use them. They're kind of like an API, but the difference is an API you usually like call for information, and it's not directly integrated into your project like these are, where these are like everywhere in your project, every step that you take when you use them. Each of these use JavaScript as its language. So JavaScript is used in React.js, Vue.js, AngularJS. That's why I have the JS at the end. But they also use other technologies to help you get the job done. Like in React, it uses JSX, which is JavaScript XML. And you can also add CSS precompilers like or post compilers like SCSS or Sass. Those help you get the job done much faster, and you don't have to initially start with them. You just start with React, and then you kind of grow your technologies as you go so that your development's faster and faster, or it's easier and easier. I think, what was the other question? Is John Joe only showing examples? The actual answers to the questions already in the program. So that's a great question. So I'll go back to the slide. So like the value John and value Doe is just default values. It's like if you were to load up the web page and you were to click here, your cursor would be at the end, and like you would have to delete John to put your actual first name. So it's like a dummy value that's being forced into it, but it's just to show like John and Doe, like the two values on the inputs. Okay. I can continue. There's other frameworks like Gatsby Gs, which is a framework that actually uses React.js under the hood, but it allows you to make multiple page websites. So going back to React.js is a single page application framework where you have to implement other stuff to do multiple pages in your project. So by default, your React.js, when you start it, you can only have one page. You can't have multiple. You need to import something like React Router DOM, or you need to use a different framework like Gatsby JS that uses React under the hood. So when you use Gatsby JS, it's kind of like React, but more. Now, this might just sound great, but it adds more boilerplate. So it's like a trade-off. If your project's really small, which might be the projects that you start with, there's no reason to use Gatsby JS. You should just stick with React JS, and you want the simplicity. If you've been using React JS for a while and you want something more of a challenge, or you want to increase the complexity of your websites, then you should definitely switch to Gatsby JS. That way you have a challenge and you have more complexity in your website. You can do more. Another framework is Next.js, which has dynamic site rendering, and it has static site rendering or static site generation. Or that's just static site, but it has dynamic site generation. And what that means is when you load up the web page, like the user dynamically gets information from whatever server that your website's on. So an example of this might be like if you're on Facebook and you log into your account, when your computer sends the request to Facebook and it sends it back, the information that Facebook sent back is specific to your account. So it has like your profile picture, stuff like that. Now, this is not exactly for Facebook since it uses React and not Next.js, but it's just an example of an application of it. But the web page already has information that is dynamically made just for you, like your profile information. Not everybody has the same name or the same profile picture. So this is really useful when your web page really relies on what users logged into the web page. Like it's going to display a different web page for each user. And Node.js we actually have a workshop on this. It's only a backend is what I put, but specifically that means for Node.js and Express. Node.js is actually the runtime environment that we use for all of these frameworks and every single JavaScript project that we do. It's also really important to understand like Node.js and NPM and like their roles in what they do, but this workshop doesn't go that far into it. That's more for the Node workshop. Okay, so what framework should you use? So this is more in the context of a hackathon. For this hackathon, I would probably recommend you try to stick to something like React. That way you can get something deployed really fast and you can also learn the most popular web framework currently. It's also really desirable to companies and stuff. We'll have a React workshop after that like is specifically for React and has a bunch of React information, but this workshop's not going to go into it. That being said, I'm going to open the floor to like questions and stuff, and then I'm going to go into some like tips and tricks that you guys should incorporate in your hackathon projects. Stuff like search engine optimization and a web manifest. Which I'll stop sharing just for the questions bit. Does anyone use Adobe Dreamweaver? I guess that's not a question just to me, but I actually used to use Adobe Dreamweaver about like 6 years ago. It was actually one of the first things that I used. And then I kind of switched from it because I found it not like annoying, but sometimes when I like move the blocks, it would just kind of auto reposition. But if there's no questions, then I'll go on to the tips and tricks that I was talking about. Okay. So hopefully you guys can see my. Well, I just closed.
We can't see it. However, someone wanted to follow up on that question. They said, would you recommend React over Dreamweaver?
I would personally recommend React over Dreamweaver because React has more companies and more people just generally using it. Now, that doesn't mean like Dreamweaver is not popular. I think Dreamweaver is a fine choice. But if you're going to go into web development, you should definitely choose React over Dreamweaver. There's much more job openings. I think it's also much more simpler once you actually get to know React, and there's more programming involved. So not only will you like feel more like a programmer, but you actually do more programming and more interactivity. So you guys can't see the code? Or you can?
We are able to, yes.
Okay, perfect. So
someone did request, would you be able to slightly increase the font size?
Yeah. How does this look?
Okay, they said that's good. And okay. Someone else asked a question, do you have any advice to connect database and website?
Yeah. So when you're connecting a database to a website, you should never do it with whatever you send to the user. So that means like if this is the website I'm sending to the user, I shouldn't have this connect directly to the database. That's like a security concern. So you should have a server and you should have your website connect to that server. And everything connecting to the database wise should be handled via the server. So your actual website shouldn't connect directly to it. That being said, um, if you're like doing this hackathon and like security is not an immediate concern, then when you're using React, you can actually search up resources like connecting to MySQL server in React, connecting to MySQL server in Svelte or Vue or Angular or anything like that. And there's actually a lot of tutorials about connecting to a database from these specific frameworks. If you're not using any of those and you're just using like plain, you might have to like import like a whole class and use like some online code that already kind of handles the connection for you. And then you use that class that you imported or that JavaScript file that you imported. Yeah, if you're using PHP, then it's PHP probably makes it the most simple. So if you're using PHP, it's like one line to connect to a MySQL database, and then like another line to do the query or another line to do the execution of the query. Okay, so the main thing that I wanted to show you guys, because this is a hackathon, we want to like improve the quality of your projects, is something called search engine optimization. Now, search engine optimization is very, very important when you're trying to get a website known to basically anybody. When Google scans your website or scans anybody's website, it's going to look for specific things on the website and it's going to take those things and it's going to use it in search. That way it helps the person that's getting the actual search results. So if you don't do any search engine optimization, like you remove like all of this and you just have like a title, then whatever your title name is, let's say it's just like portfolio or Zachary's portfolio, then when Google's doing like its analysis of your website, it's only going to take those two, and it's not going to like, if they search up like web developer, it's not going to show you because you didn't put web developer, you didn't put anything like that in your side of your website. So these key things allow you to add search engine optimization to your project, and it's like really cool to put like search engine optimization on your GitHub project or anything like that, and it's actually super simple too. So one of the things that you can do is add an author. So once you actually get famous or something like that, someone searches your name or anybody searches your name in general, the author tag like helps them recognize that. You can have keywords. So ideally you should have like 20 plus keywords. You just put a bunch of them in there. So I just put like the basic website portfolio. You could put like web designer, web developer, something like that. You can keep on adding keywords. That way you're more likely to search up in search results. You should add a description. I would recommend I would try to keep it small because it's also the description that you see when you're like on the tab right here when you hover over. But something small, something succinct that people will read. You can also maybe put it like 50 lines. That way, when they search up on Google, like the little lines under it, they can see it. And finally, this viewport's just for accessibility. So it doesn't have to do directly with search engine optimization. But by default, most websites, like they'll probably like sneak it in. So we have open graph tags, which is something that stuff like LinkedIn uses to look at your website and make some like pre-made content with it, which it's pre-made by you. So when you post something like a website on LinkedIn, for example, it'll take this open graph image property and it'll take the image and it will use it when you post the link. So if you post the link like in your featured or whatnot, it's going to take this image and that's going to be the preview image. The same thing happens for like when you use it with Facebook, like you make a Facebook post with an image, it's going to take it from the image link. So same thing with this Twitter card down here. If you want to look at it, it'll take this image and it'll post it as the default. So all these things make your website more accessible and more shareable. It allows it to be search engine optimization more. It's just stuff that you should do to make your website more accessible and have everybody actually be able to view it. If you don't have all this stuff, then you're not going to search up on search results more. Your website's going to look plain when you link it somewhere. You have like a bunch of downsides. Okay. Are there any questions about search engine optimization? There's a couple other stuff that you can do, but there's like the basis of it, so that you can say you added search engine optimization and stuff like that. It really does help with search results. Like if you just search up my name, you have like a whole list of all the stuff that I did, and it's just because I put like my authors, stuff like that. Okay, so there's no questions about search engine optimization. I bet we're all really tired. It's 12:30 for me. It's probably later for some of y'all. But I also wanted to move into PWAs, which are progressive web applications. Progressive web applications are really cool. I made this sample project here, but I actually wanted to show like a project that I made before, just because this project is like an empty web page. But progressive web applications allow your application to be downloaded on the phone, on a desktop, basically every single device. As long as you make it responsive, it'll look really good on that device, and it'll act like a native application. So just for example, if I were to go to the website that I'm talking about, it's like a to-do app that I made or like a while back. It's just to show you guys the progressive web application features. It'll add a little symbol, and it'll allow you to install any app. And now that I installed the application, it looks and it acts like an actual desktop application in Windows. So if I were to close it, it's added it to my desktop automatically, and I can open it, and it looks like a desktop application. And I think this is really cool. So if I log in with Google, it'll ask me to log in, and it's a desktop application that I can resize, rescale, and stuff like that. So the user doesn't have to actually go to their website, your website. They can just open your progressive web application. So if you guys are interested in this, you should have this as like a stretch goal, or like something that you should do once you get your project working, because it allows users to use your application on mobile, web, and depending on your application, it's actually really, really useful. The second thing that I wanted to show with progressive web applications is that if you noticed with the to-do one, I have like a symbol. And when you have a symbol and images for your website, it makes it much, much, much more user-friendly. Like if they have an actual image to the name, it looks much better. So for example, in this project, I went online and I gave it my main image, which was logo original, which is just the UPE code logo. UPE is a little, you can't really see it because it's dark mode, but I gave it the UPE code image. And when I gave it that, I searched up Fave icon generator. Now, Fave icon generator, there's an actual website, I think they Fave icon generator. And you give it your image, it's going to make all these files for you that are a bunch of different sizes. And the reason it makes all these images for you is because it also makes this. So let me go into this first. So it makes all those images for you. It uses them here. It also uses them in an index.html gives you. It gives you like a copy pastable, this block of text, and it uses all of those icons that it made for you. Now, the reason that it has like so many different sizes and does all this, and it's like all the same image, but a different size, is because there's different size images just like this that you want users to be able to see. So on a phone, it's a different size. On a web page, like on the top left, it's a different size. Everything like that. You want a new unique image. That way the user has a responsive image that looks good at that quality. Now, this doesn't look crazy good, you might say, but this is going to be like in the corner of their screen. So they're going to see like the main logo. So that's ideally what we want. If you look at like even Google Slides, the logo actually isn't that high quality. It's just like two boxes. So if you add images to your website, it makes it much more user-friendly, and it also just makes it more digestible to the eye. Okay, so I'm gonna stop screen sharing. Please, I'm done with that portion. And I'm just going to open the floor to questions and stuff like that. But all the content of the workshop is pretty much over. I'm just going to discuss what you guys were asking about before and what someone asked just right now. Like, how did I do Google authentication? So to do Google authentication, I used a service called Firebase. If you search up Firebase, it's a Google Cloud product that they offer. And if you use their like authentication service, it's actually really simple. It's like 4 lines of code about. You make a profile with them, you get the config that they send you, and you can make any of your websites have some authentication service that you can either do like straight through Google, or you can have it like email and password. You can do a bunch of different authentication. I just chose Google authentication because it was like the simplest. But I used Firebase for the authentication system. And Nicholas asks, who uses PWA? It's not like who uses it, but it's not like some like additional technology you add. It's more like a movement that like Mac and Windows and Android and Apple have all been doing. It's a movement that they've all been doing that allows you to download progressive web applications. So like you just add a little extra stuff to your website, and then boom, like you can download it natively to all these applications, to all those operating systems. So you asked, how does PWA work on mobile? Do I have to download it on the phone itself or visit it on the browser or in the phone? So how PWA works on mobile is that when you go to the web page, it'll ask like, do you want to install this web page onto your phone? And you click yes, and it'll actually be like a downloadable, like it'll make it into like an app, and you click it and it'll open just like an app. So that's like one of the unique benefits of PWA. You don't have to do any other work, and you just reach to a whole new audience on the mobile. How would you recommend starting to make projects in HTML and CSS? So if you're just starting off with HTML CSS, there's a couple of things like options that you could do. You could just like go straight into it with like maybe start like look at a tutorial, like do a 2-hour tutorial about it and like do files, like get hands in on it. And then after that, like try to do it yourself. You could also like search up like a drag and drop builder just to get the feel for it and then go into it yourself, something like that. But the most important thing is that you get like direct use with it. You try to use it and you try to look at it as much as possible, because the more you use it and the more you look at it, the more familiar it becomes, and like it becomes way, way more easier and doesn't look like a alien piece of stuff. So it's like very important that you actually get like use and try to understand it. And then ironically, like you don't know how to use it until you use it type thing. I think I did miss a question.
Someone did ask what framework you used for your to-do app.
Yeah. So for my to-do app, I actually use Svelte, which is one of my actually favorite languages. I wouldn't recommend starting off with Svelte though, but it's a really cool like new framework that's been on. Can you recommend some projects for beginners? I think to-do app is pretty like a pretty popular one. And when I made the to-do app, it was to learn Svelte actually, and as well to like mess around with like responsive styling. You can also do like a portfolio. That's actually like the most popular out of like CS students. In general, they make like 4 different portfolios and just like keep on making them until like they get one that looks good. You can also do like a quiz game, or you could do a data analysis website that gets some data and it processes it. In React, there's already libraries that do data analysis. So you don't need to know that much data analysis. It's more like just putting the technologies together. If you want something for like your resume, I actually recommend that a lot. What's better, HTML, CSS, or Flask? Well, I would never recommend you just use HTML and CSS, but Flask is like a full-on front end and back end. Like it can do both. You can separate the two. So Flask has more complexity. So it just depends on what like type of website you're doing. If you're doing a to-do app, if it doesn't even have like a database that saves it, then I would probably recommend HTML and CSS. Like if it's just like in the moment to-do app. But if you're doing a to-do app that has like a server that saves it and like more features that involve more, then I would do a Flask application. Okay. Can we use React for a database project? I think it's more like the other way around. Can we use a database in a React project? Because if you want to use React in a, okay, then it's the other way around. Okay, so if we want to use a database in a React project, uh, there's a bunch of libraries for each database that you can use. So for MongoDB, there's the Mongoose uh, library. I don't know if React still uses that. That might be out of date information, but you can like search it up and there's like a really simple tutorial. Usually it starts with like you installing the dependencies and then using it. But the main thing is just starting the React project. For PostSQL, I'm pretty sure you can just search it up and they have a pretty easy tutorial on it. I've actually never used that combination with React. I've only used PostSQL with like PHP or something like that.
Someone did ask, can you recommend some projects for beginners? I think we skipped that one.
That's like the to-do app, the logistics, like statistics website, like processing data with the React libraries. When I was learning, I made some games. Like I made a tile game and an animal collector. Honestly, if you were to try to pick one and you're trying to get started, you should pick one that you're passionate about and that you really like, because then you're more motivated. And that's like the main thing that happens when people are learning web development. Like they don't get motivated enough, and then like they kind of stop doing it. So if you pick something that you're really motivated with, then you're much more likely to complete the project and learn a lot. I want to learn about the data analytic project. You have a tutorial documentation to start with. So I personally don't have like a tutorial documentation to start with, but if you want somewhere to start, you make a React project. Like if you were to like list it out, first you make a React project. Second, you find some data that you want to do an analysis of or you want to graphically display. So you could just search up like one example that we did in our AI workshop last semester was like curse words said or words said during the presidential debate. And like you could then search up, okay, uh, what React library can we use to process this data? Then that's like the three key concepts. And once you actually have the data that you're going to process, what React library you can use and a React project setup, then all you have to do is like combine those technologies, and then you have your final product. Then you have to actually like style it to make it look nice and stuff like that. You mentioned a React workshop going on this week. So I think tomorrow at like 11 around there, or tomorrow at 1 is the React workshop, also hosted by me. Okay. So is there any other questions?
So I just looked up like the time for the React workshop. It's from 11 a.m. to noon tomorrow morning, I believe, or I guess today, this morning.
Okay. Thank you. Kevin asks, where can we host our website for free? I believe GitHub does like a GitHub pages that you can host your workshop for free or your website for free. You can also host it directly on your computer, but that might like do security issues with your network and stuff like that if you do it wrong. But GitHub pages, you can host your website for free, or it's like super low cost, because that's where most people host their website. No problem. So I think if we don't have any other questions, then you guys are all free to leave. Have a great night. Thank you guys all for coming, even though it's like 1 a.m. And I hope to see you guys in the 11 to noon React workshop. And then right after that, the Node workshop. So have a good night, all. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, everyone.